Victor and Nikki fear. Nick is falling apart. Nick Newman stood frozen in the middle of the ranch living room, staring at his father like he barely recognized him. Victor Newman had seen anger before. He had seen betrayal. He had seen fear in his children's eyes. But this was different. Nick looked exhausted, unfocused, shaky. And for the first time in years, Victor suddenly realized something terrifying. His son might be losing control. "You think I can't handle myself?" Nick snapped, his voice rising fast. "You think I'm weak now?" Nikki stepped forward immediately, trying to calm him down before things exploded further. "No one said you're weak," Nikki said softly. "We're worried about you." Nick laughed bitterly. That laugh scared Nikki more than yelling ever could, because it sounded hopeless. The tension inside the Newman ranch had been building for days. Nick had barely been sleeping. He'd been making reckless decisions at work, canceling meetings, forgetting important conversations, snapping at employees for no reason. Even Victoria had quietly admitted something felt wrong. At first, Victor blamed stress. But now he wasn't so sure. Nick paced across the room, rubbing his forehead hard like he was trying to stop a pounding headache. "You're all watching me like I'm some kind of ticking bomb," Nick muttered. Victor's expression darkened. "Because your judgment has changed," Victor said bluntly, "and everybody sees it." Nick immediately turned toward him. "There it is," he fired back. "The great Victor Newman deciding who's stable and who isn't." "Don't do that," Nikki warned, but Nick was already spiraling. "No, let's be honest," Nick continued. "Dad thinks I'm failing. Victoria thinks I'm unstable. Adam probably loves every second of this." Victor's jaw tightened at Adam's name. "This has nothing to do with Adam." "It always has something to do with Adam." Nick slammed his hand against the table so hard that Nikki jumped. Silence filled the room. Heavy silence. Victor stared at his son carefully now. Not with anger, with concern. Real concern. Nick noticed it too, and somehow, that made everything worse. "I don't need people treating me like I'm broken," Nick said quietly. Nikki's eyes filled with emotion. "You're not broken," she whispered. But Nick looked away, because deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. The pressure around him had been building for months. Sharon's struggles, family battles, constant pressure from Newman Enterprises, endless tension with Adam. The weight never stopped, and lately, Nick felt like he couldn't breathe. Even simple conversations felt overwhelming. His thoughts raced constantly. One moment he felt angry, the next moment numb, and nobody knew how bad it had truly become. Later that evening, Nikki found Victor alone in his office. He was staring out the window silently, holding a drink he barely touched. "That worried you?" Nikki said. Victor didn't answer immediately. Then finally, "Yes." Nikki sat beside him slowly. "He's trying to carry too much," she said. Victor nodded once. "But he's hiding something." Nikki looked at him carefully. "You think it's worse than stress?" Victor's voice lowered. "I think Nick is reaching a breaking point." Meanwhile, Nick sat alone in his dark house, replaying every argument in his head. Victor's disappointment, Victoria's concern, Nikki's tears. It all felt suffocating. His phone buzzed repeatedly with missed calls. He ignored every single one. Then another message appeared. "Victoria, please call me. We're worried." Nick stared at the screen for several long seconds before throwing the phone across the couch. He couldn't take it anymore. Everyone kept watching him, questioning him, analyzing every move he made. And somewhere deep inside, Nick started wondering if maybe they were right. The next morning at Newman Enterprises, things got even worse. Nick arrived late to an important meeting already in progress. His appearance shocked several executives immediately. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his temper was hanging by a thread. Victoria quickly stood up. "Nick, maybe we should reschedule?" "No," Nick interrupted sharply. Start the meeting. The room became tense instantly. Victor watched quietly from the end of the table. At first, Nick tried to stay focused, but within minutes, everything unraveled. He forgot numbers, mixed up reports, snapped at an executive who tried correcting him. Then suddenly, Nick completely lost his patience. "You think I don't know what's happening here?" he exploded. "Everybody's talking behind my back." The room fell silent. Victoria looked horrified. "Nick? No," he shouted. "Say it. You all think I can't do this anymore." Victor finally stood up slowly. "That's enough." But Nick pointed directly at him. "You started this." Victor's voice became cold. "We are trying to help you." Nick shook his head violently. "No, you're trying to control me." Then he stormed out of the meeting, leaving stunned silence behind him. Victoria immediately turned toward Victor. "That was bad." Victor's expression hardened. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "Much worse than I expected." Back at home, Nikki received another disturbing phone call. Nick had missed another important obligation, completely forgotten it. Nikki's fear deepened instantly. She knew her son, and this wasn't normal behavior. Something was happening to him emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. But Nick refused to slow down long enough to face it. That night, Nikki finally confronted him directly. She arrived at his house unannounced and found him sitting alone in darkness again. Only one lamp was on. Nick barely looked up when she entered. "You should turn some lights on," Nikki said softly. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that." Nick rubbed his face tiredly. "Mom, please." Nikki sat beside him carefully. "When was the last time you slept?" Nick didn't answer. That answer alone terrified her. She reached for his hand. "You don't have to fight this alone." Nick's eyes suddenly became emotional. For one brief second, Nikki saw the truth. He was scared, truly scared. "I don't feel like myself anymore," Nick admitted quietly. Nikki's heart broke instantly. "What do you mean?" Nick swallowed hard. "Some days I can't focus. Other days I feel angry for no reason. Then suddenly I feel nothing at all." Nikki stayed silent, letting him speak. "I keep trying to push through it," Nick continued. "But it's getting worse." Tears filled Nikki's eyes. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't want Dad looking at me like I'm weak." At the ranch, Victor received shocking new information moments later. A private investigator had been quietly monitoring unusual financial activity connected to Nick's recent business decisions, and the numbers were alarming. Very alarming. Victor's face darkened as he reviewed the report. Massive mistakes, risky investments, uncharacteristic decisions. This wasn't normal Nick Newman behavior. Not even close. Then came the final detail that made Victor immediately stand up. Nick had secretly authorized something that could seriously damage Newman Enterprises financially if it moved forward. Victor grabbed his coat instantly, because suddenly this situation wasn't just emotional anymore. It was dangerous. And for the first time, Victor began wondering if someone was manipulating his son when he was at his weakest. Meanwhile, Nick sat with Nikki in painful silence. "I just need time," Nick whispered. But before Nikki could answer, someone started pounding hard on the front door. Nick looked confused. Nikki looked nervous. Then Victor's furious voice echoed from outside. "Nick, open this door now!" Nick slowly stood up. But the moment he opened the door, Victor walked in holding the financial report in his hand. And the look on Victor Newman's face changed everything. Part 2. Victor discovers Nick's dangerous secret. Victor threw the report onto the table so hard that papers scattered everywhere. Nick instantly looked stunned. Nikki rose to her feet nervously. "Victor?" "Not now," Victor said sharply, never taking his eyes off Nick. The room became ice cold. Nick stared down at the documents, then his expression changed. Not surprise, fear. Victor noticed immediately. "You knew," Victor said quietly. Nick looked away. That silence confirmed everything. Nikki stepped closer carefully. "What is this?" Victor answered without hesitation. "Unauthorized investments, massive financial exposure, decisions that could damage Newman Enterprises permanently." Nikki looked horrified. "Nick, please tell me this isn't true." Nick rubbed his forehead again, visibly overwhelmed. "I was trying to fix things." Victor exploded instantly. "By gambling company money behind my back?" Nick fired back just as fast. "You never trusted me anyway." Victor stepped forward. "Because lately you don't trust yourself." The words hit hard, too hard. Nick froze completely, and suddenly the anger draining from his face revealed something much worse underneath. Exhaustion, pain, defeat. Nikki immediately stepped between them. "Stop this," she pleaded, but Victor wasn't calming down. "Who convinced you to make these deals?" Victor demanded. "Who's been influencing you?" "No one." "I don't believe that." Nick's breathing became heavier now. "You think I'm being manipulated?" Victor stared directly into his eyes. "I think someone saw you vulnerable." Nick laughed bitterly again. "There it is. I'm vulnerable. I'm unstable. I'm weak." "No," Nikki said emotionally. "You're struggling?" But Nick suddenly snapped. "I don't need everyone treating me like a patient." His voice echoed through the house. Then came silence again. Long silence. Nick closed his eyes tightly, realizing he had lost control again. Nikki looked devastated. Victor looked more concerned than angry now. And that frightened Nick more than anything, because Victor Newman rarely showed fear. But he was showing it now. Victor lowered his voice carefully. "Son, this is bigger than stress." Nick sat down heavily on the couch. For the first time all night, he didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't fight. He simply looked tired. "I know," he admitted quietly. Nikki sat beside him immediately. "Then let us help you." Nick swallowed hard. "You really want the truth?" Victor nodded once. Nick looked down at the floor. "There are moments lately when I honestly don't know what I'm doing anymore." Nikki covered her mouth emotionally. Nick continued slowly. "I lose focus in the middle of conversations. I forget meetings. I start feeling angry and I don't even know why." Victor remained silent, listening carefully. "Sometimes," Nick whispered, "I feel completely disconnected from everything around me." The confession shook the entire room. Because this wasn't Nick Newman talking like himself anymore. This was a man falling apart in real time. Nikki reached for his hand again. "We're going to get through this." But Nick's expression suddenly darkened. "You don't understand." Victor narrowed his eyes. "What aren't you telling us?" Nick hesitated. That hesitation immediately alarmed Victor. Then, finally, "I think somebody's been using this against me." Victor's face hardened instantly. "Who?" Nick shook his head slowly. "I don't know." That answer only made things worse. Nick explained that over the last few weeks, confidential information kept appearing in the wrong places. Business conversations he barely remembered having somehow ended up benefiting competitors. At first, he thought he was simply distracted. Now he wasn't so sure. Victor immediately switched into protection mode. "Did someone approach you recently?" Victor asked. Nick hesitated again. "Yes." "Who?" Nick looked directly at his father. "I don't know his real name." Victor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Nick explained that a mysterious consultant had slowly gained his trust during several business meetings outside Newman Enterprises. The man always seemed calm, helpful, understanding, and somehow, he always appeared during Nick's worst moments. "He knew things about me," Nick admitted. "Personal things." Nikki looked terrified now. Victor's instincts exploded instantly. "How much access did you give him?" Nick's silence answered the question. Victor turned away furiously, already realizing how serious this situation had become. Because if someone intentionally targeted Nick during a mental and emotional collapse, then this was no longer just a family crisis. It was war. Victor immediately ordered security to investigate every interaction Nick had over the past month. But before he could make another call, Nick suddenly grabbed his chest slightly and leaned forward. Nikki panicked instantly. "Nick?" Nick tried to speak, but his breathing became uneven. Victor rushed toward him immediately. "Nick!" Nick's face had gone pale. For one terrifying second, even Victor looked helpless. Nikki grabbed her phone with shaking hands. "We're calling a doctor right now." Nick finally looked up at both of them, and in that moment, all the anger was gone. Only fear remained. Real fear. "I think something's seriously wrong with me," he whispered. Nikki broke down crying. Victor placed a hand firmly on his son's shoulder. And despite all the power Victor Newman possessed, despite all the enemies he had destroyed, he suddenly faced something he could not control, watching his son fall apart. Outside the house, headlights slowly appeared in the darkness. A black car parked across the street. Inside the vehicle, an unknown man watched the Newman house carefully, watching, waiting, smiling. And as Victor prepared to protect his son from whatever threat was closing in, one terrifying question remained unanswered. Was Nick Newman already too far gone to save?